Which one was that?
Yeah, that's the difference between scratch players and 18 handicaps. So there's 18 shots worth of difference between them, but only 1.8 of those shots is because the scratch players make more birdies. So the ticket
That's
to
cool.
getting better isn't more birdies. It's less of the doubles, the triples, the quads and worse. It's reducing those, and you're going to do that by reducing penalty shots, the number of tee shots you hit OB or into the water, number of approach shots you're hitting into penalty situations. That's going to be a big driver to reducing some of those big numbers, and then making your bad shots just a little less bad.
Lou, thanks so much for joining us here on the podcast. And just want to jump right into it. How do you become a stats guy? I think, when you work even tangentially in golf, people will reach out to you and say, all right, I want to do something in golf. Or how do you get into golf? Whether it's from the podcast people listen to, there's so many different paths and different ways that we come to this. What was your path? Because I think you're getting into this, I guess I'll call it, it's not a niche. Like people are, there's a lot of experts out there and a lot of study in golf statistics. But how'd you find your spot?
It's an interesting story. So I have a background in analytics. I still have a day job in corporate America, and I've been working in analytics since before they called it that, 20 plus years now. And almost 5 years ago now, I started to dabble more with some professional golf stats. Prior to that, I had been a stat junkie with my own game for the last couple decades. Had a spreadsheet, a la Matt Fitzpatrick, where I tracked every single shot that I hit, going back to the mid 90s, put it into a spreadsheet, analyzed it a million different ways. So it's always been, part of my DNA, what I do and what I enjoy doing. And about 5 years ago, I started to dabble with some professional data and decided I was going to start a blog to write about golf stats going into the winter of 2018. My wife thought I was nuts. I just wanted to kill some time here in the Northeast. And I never intended any of this to happen. And I put a few blog posts out there and started to have a number of people reach out to me about things and started posting things on social media, which I'd never done before. And here we are, 4.5 years later, and it's been kind of a wild ride, to be honest.
That's a pretty quick ride as well, Lou. I'm not going to lie to you. 4.5 years to the Golfers Journal podcast is a short path, actually. And you have become sort of one of the, if you're into, if you're on golf Twitter, you're one of the you're one of the folks you have to follow. Lou Stagner, the Golf Stat Pro. What is your handle? Is it just at Lou Stagner?
At Lou Stagner. You got it. Yeah.
Well,
Perfect.
there you go. And I love to follow because every once in a while you'll throw out a stat that is either provocative or surprising or gives me hope. So one of the reasons we wanted to have you on to the pod, not only because you're interesting and learned in the field, but also, our members at the Golfers Journal are undertaking this index experiment. They're trying to play better golf this year. And, we've talked to a lot of folks, and the theme of statistics keeps coming back. This idea of managing expectations, of really understanding what we do in our golf games and how knowing our own sort of trends and tendencies can help us play better golf, enjoy golf, score better. And we've also, of course, incorporated Arccos into the index experiment. So our members, it's in their member locker, can go in there and sign up for Arccos and save $250 all in on a package to learn more about what their golf game is all about. Well, let's just tell folks, if they might not be familiar with Arccos, because I know you're involved with Arccos, what's your involvement and how's Arccos going to help them play better golf?
I'm the data insights lead at Arccos. I've been with them now over a year. It's been awesome. It's a great organization. They do some amazing things. They have some incredible things in the hopper. with all of the data that they collect. And it's real easy if you've never used it before. You'll get sensors that go on the end of your club, and they screw into that little hole in the grip, or you can buy grips with the sensors already built in. They'll hook up to your phone. We also have a product called the Link. If you don't want to play with your phone in your pocket, it's a really small device that goes on your belt. You just clip it on, and that records all of your stats for you. And it's extremely simple to use, get set up and run, and then very easy to, after a round, start consuming and digesting and understanding your game.
Yeah, so it's telling you not only... So I've got it here. I mean, we're in the off season, so I haven't had to really get the full sample size, but really looking forward to, playing more with it and learning, of course, not only just how far my golf clubs actually go, which I'll get real data on that,
Yep.
on course data versus because there's a difference between the driving range and the golf course. But I'll actually know my shots gained in all these categories, and that's, wow, how exciting. That's cool. I'm just going to, I think not only is that going to help me sort of focus sort of my practice or the way I'm playing or approaching my round of golf, it's just going to be a lot of fun for a data person having access to all Arccos is collecting now. That's got to be like a dream come true.
Yeah, it's amazing. We have 625 million shots roughly now in the database, which to put that in perspective, ShotLink, which is what the PGA Tour uses,
80% of them are mine. I know.
They've used that since 2004. They only have about 25 million shots. So Arccos has 625 million. PGA Tour has 25 million. So there's really not much we can't look at. Our sample size is so huge. And to me, it as your members are starting to, investigate and explore the opportunities with Arccos and what that means for their game, and they're trying to improve with the index experiment, which is a really cool thing that I'm going to be following along. It's really important to know your stats. So I can tell you generically, if you're a 10 or a 15 handicap, you should probably work on ball striking. And generically, I would be true. But that may not apply to you. And I've given this example a few times before, but it's very telling. So if you take 10 handicaps and put 3 10 handicaps on the tee, and the first one is the typical 10 handicap in every category with their driver, their approach play, their short game, and their putting. The other 10 handicap is an extremely good putter, one of the best putters for 10 handicaps you'll find. And the other player is a horrible putter, one of the worst putters for a 10 handicap you'll find. Now, they're all 10 handicaps. Every single one of them is going to be a 10. The really bad putter putts like the typical 20 handicap. The really good putter will putt like the typical scratch player. There's a huge amount of skill difference between the typical 20 handicap putter and the typical scratch putter, about 5 shots per round. And so generically, I would tell you if you're a 10 or a 15, which a lot of people are, they fall into that range, I would tell you ball striking is probably really important. But you might be different. You might be somebody that is a horrific putter for a 10 handicap, and you should be focusing your efforts on that part of the game. And tracking your stats and looking at your information is going to give you that blueprint on how you can improve faster. Hopefully that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think, so if we were to speak in generics or averages, because we can't say, if our listeners are on which end of the putting spectrum or driving spectrum they might actually be. What are the statistical differences between sort of a lot of folks in this experiment are probably trying to get to scratch, and they might be at, say, a 10. That's a long way to go, or wherever you're trying to go. What are the statistical differences between, what they do in a round of golf between a 10 handicap and a scratch player? We know, okay, yeah, you post X score and you get X handicap, but what's actually happening usually on the golf course to create that scoring disparity?
Yeah, if we just consider the typical scratch player versus the typical 10 player, the scratch player is, and this is going to sound, silly and obvious, but they're better in everything across the board. They're better with their driver. They're better with their approach play. They're better with their short game. They're better with their putting. Now, the biggest delta in one of those categories is typically going to be with approach play. That's where you're going to see the biggest difference in skill. And improving your approach play is typically a pathway that's going to lead to more improvement, quicker improvement. And off the tee is also extremely important. And there's a pretty big delta there. Putting as well. And so each one of these, there's a pretty big gap between a 10 and a scratch. But if you want to improve and get down to being a scratch player, ball striking is absolutely going to be key. And that oftentimes doesn't just mean hitting it closer. It means not having big misses. It means making your bad shots a little bit better, less penalty strokes, less hitting into the trees and having to come out sideways, less hitting into really challenging bunker situations. 10 and 15 handicaps typically struggle out of bunkers. So it's those kind of decisions and those kind of shots that can really move the needle for you. And then the other thing that's huge is distance. There's a big distance gap off the tee between a scratch player and a 10 handicap player, roughly about 30 yards off the tee. And it's huge. That's a huge impact on the game. Every 10 yards is going to be, there's no perfect formula here, but it's maybe a shot roughly every 10 yards off the tee. So if you're 30 yards longer, that's going to be about 3 shots, give or take. Again, these are just some rough estimates. So if speed training is part of what you are trying to do in your index experiment, I would encourage people to look at speed training as something that could potentially be low-hanging fruit for them.
Oh, I like it. We actually have in our Discord server, the Broken Tea Society, we have the Need for Speed group, chasing speed for sure. So a lot of speed training going on this off season. I'm getting into some. I keep saying like tomorrow's the day I start my speed regimen. Maybe it is now after hearing that. I know I can squeeze 20 more yards out. That's 2 strokes. That would kind of get me where I want to be. Also, physical conditioning. I know a lot of our people are trying to get in better shape, which is going to help us hit farther as well. And of course, we're all hitting the TSR driver from Titleist. So that's gonna. Or if you do, you will find some more of those elusive yardages as well. I love your posts are great.
I appreciate that.
Simple and clean and convincing because you've got the data. Twitter is full of a lot of anecdotal whatever, and it's nice to see stats where it's like, okay, we can all maybe agree on something. Statistics. You've got 650 billion golf shots. These are coming from. One that stood out to me recently, and I'm probably misquoting it, but the 1.8 birdies per round, the difference between was a 12 and a scratch player, or there was whatever players it was pretty small in terms of how many more birdies you actually had to make per round. It was a hopeful stat. Which one was that?
Yeah, that's the difference between scratch players and 18 handicaps. So there's 18 shots worth of difference between them, but only 1.8 of those shots is because the scratch players make more birdies. So the ticket
That's
to
cool.
getting better isn't more birdies. It's less of the doubles, the triples, the quads and worse. It's reducing those, and you're going to do that by reducing penalty shots, the number of tee shots you hit OB or into the water, number of approach shots you're hitting into penalty situations. That's going to be a big driver to reducing some of those big numbers. And then making your bad shots just a little less bad. You're still going to hit bad shots. We just want to make them a little bit less bad and get them a little bit closer to the being around the hole, around the green.
That's very encouraging. Yeah, we don't need to make.
It is. Yeah, it's very encouraging.
Because you watch we watch golf on the weekend, and we look at someone making 6, 7, 8 birdies around, and we call that great golf, which it obviously is. There's a lot of different kinds of great golf, and sometimes great golf is 1 birdie around, and just sort of keeping the rest of, and otherwise just keeping the ball in front of you. That goes to this point of managing expectations that came up a lot when we spoke with our good friend John Sherman from Practical Golf. Do you know John?
I know John. Yeah, I know John really well.
I imagine you must cross I was going to say, you've certainly crossed paths because he's using data in his practical golf to get people to try and realize, what good golf and what golf should look like for them, so they can enjoy it more. Now, as you've dug down into these stats, that was a hopeful stat that we just talked about. What's another stat that you can share with our listeners on their path to improvement that should make them feel optimistic about what they actually have to try and accomplish? They don't have to go out and be Justin Thomas. They can do X, and they're going to see difference.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I could probably answer that in a lot of different ways. And the first way I want to talk about that is the way that people interpret sort of the handicap system. And it's probably not what you were expecting me to go to, but I've worked with enough amateur players now where this is a big impact for people. And it's in this managing expectations where if someone is, let's say, a 10 handicap, they are expecting to go out and shoot their handicap, which doesn't happen often. It's only going to typically happen about 20% of the time. So if you're a 10 handicap and you're getting 10 strokes and it's a par 72, you're only going to shoot 82 or better about 20% of the time. Your scoring average for every skill level is typically going to be about your course handicap plus 3 shots over that. So if you're a scratch player playing on a par 72 and you're getting 0 strokes, no strokes at all, your scoring average is going to be about 75. A 10 index on a par 72 that's getting 10 strokes is going to have a scoring average of about 85. So you're going to have variance in your scoring. You're going to have a lot of rounds as a 10 handicap that are going to be in the upper 80s. That are going to be 90, 91. You're going to have some rounds there as your outliers. And you're going to have very few rounds 82 or better. And so I think when people understand that, they stop being so hard on themselves. Now, it's not that I don't want you to try and shoot the best possible score every time you tee it up, but having the understanding that at sort of this higher level, at the round level, you're going to have variance in your scoring. I think that helps the mindset quite a bit. And then that just translates down to the shot level. Not every single shot you hit is going to be inside of 5 feet with a look at birdie. It's just not how it works, even for the best players on the planet. So understanding that you can pick a good target and have every intention to hit the ball exactly at that target, but then realize that that's not going to happen too often. And you shouldn't beat yourself up over that. And I've seen a lot of players that go down this, this spiral of doom where they have expectations that just do not align with what their skill level is. And those expectations that are warped can lead to getting really frustrated. And getting really frustrated, as you know, Tom, that's not a good combination to play good golf. So I want to stress again, it's not that I don't want you to not try. It's not that I don't want you to not care. I want you to give it every single thing you have on every shot, but realize that it's not going to go perfectly every time, and don't beat yourself up over that.
Very well said. And something, it's hard. It's so important to remember. Hard to do out there in the heat of battle where,
it is.
I've put my time in, I've paid my money, and damn it, I want to beat my handicap today. But you can't.
But that's why it's so important. And I'm sorry to interrupt. That's why it's so important to track your stats.
Yeah.
That's why it's so important to, if I were to ask you to flip a quarter right now and flip it 10 times and heads came up eight out of 10 times, moving forward, you're not going to think that heads is 80% likely. Heads is a 50-50 shot every time you flip it. Well, if you're just looking at these really small samples, one or two or a handful of really good or really bad shots when you're in a single round of golf, and you're letting that dictate how you feel about your game, it's like flipping a quarter 10 times and going, heads is 80% likely. You need to look at a larger sample. You need to look at several rounds, see how you're trending and see how you're doing overall, and see if your approach game, your driver game, your short game, your putting, if that's falling within the boundaries for your skill level, that would be considered acceptable. Or if you're trying to target a certain handicap to get to, like how are your stats comparing to, let's say, a 5 handicap, if that was your goal. So doing that really helps to give you perspective, as opposed to just, I can't believe I just hit that wedge shot and missed the green, and then letting that dictate how you feel about your wedge play.
Yeah, and I can see a scenario. That's a good point. Where, if I go out and I have a round that it's sort of a little bit of a relief to not just have to judge my golf via one number, where I can say, okay, today, put up a nice 83, but I drove it well. But I accomplished X, Y, and Z, or I'm trying to focus on hitting more greens. And today I just had a weird day, a weird putting day, I think that using statistics can sort of help be something of a bulwark against some of those negative thoughts, because I imagine in every round statistically we can find something positive to take away, or even knowing where I need to work on my game is a positive as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree completely. Just knowing where to focus your effort allows you to improve quicker. I've told this story before, and I every time I tell it, I forget who told me this. When Justin Rose started working with Foley, he went to him and he said, my wedge game needs work. It's horrible. It's horrific. And Foley looked at the numbers and said, you are, one of the best 2 or 3 wedge players on the PGA Tour. Like, what are you talking about? And even somebody at that level who is incredible at golf and was playing really well at the time and had a tremendous wedge game, he had this bias about his own wedge play that was probably influenced by a couple of ill-timed wedge shots that became, my wedge game is horrible. And that was just not the reality. It was just not the reality. And, when you're one of the top 2 or 3 in any category on the PGA Tour, you're really good. There's probably not much room to improve. And you would probably want to just maintain that skill instead of spending a lot of time on that skill. And that's one of the real benefits and the power of knowing your own data, is that you're not going to waste cycles working on something that you otherwise shouldn't. So if you are a 10 handicap that hits the ball, with an approach game like a 4 handicap, which happens, and you putt like a 20 handicap, you're probably going to want to work on putting. And so knowing that is going to help you to focus in the right spot.
That's encouraging. If Justin Rose is even feeling like, hey, not knowing what he's good at, we need to look closely at what we're good at. Again, Arccos is a really handy way to do that. We don't do commercials here at the Golfers Journal, but Arccos has become a cool partner, and we're and how else? I'm not a stats guy. Like, I'm not going to. I'll be honest, Lou. I'm not gonna write down. I'm not going to keep a spreadsheet when I'm done. I admire and envy my friends who have, but it just was never. It's not my thing. Now, if I have an app that's going to do it for me, now we're talking. And then you get the numbers and you're like, wow, this is fun. So there's a fun part to it as well. Now, once you got access, right, you get access to all these golf shots that Arccos has, much larger than that, as you said, that subset that, say, like Brody was dealing with when he's looking at, with the PGA Tour was tracking, even more golf. What blew your mind? Like, for a stats or data person, you're just like, no, that can't be right. Was there something in there that you found particularly surprising or exciting?
There's a few things I've looked at, and one of those, and I'm going to touch on tour data. So one of the things that I found extremely interesting with PGA Tour data, looking at ShotLink, was straight putts tended to have a lower make rate. And I found that to be pretty fascinating. The first time I spoke about this, it was on a Michael Breed's show. And afterwards, as soon as I hung up, who was it? I think it was Fred Funk. Fred Funk called in. Said, yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. And I think that's because, we don't have too many putts that are dead straight or extremely straight, really straight. And we're typically trying to read something. At least this is my hypothesis. And if a player is standing 7 feet away and there's really not much movement in a putt, they might overread those more often, trying to find movement because there typically is movement. And so they tend to have a smaller make percentage, where when you get on, that 3/4 or 1% slope, those are not sloping too much, but it's obvious which way it's going to break. There's no question that this is going to go left to right or right to left. You can see that it's obvious, and it's not, an extreme amount of break. It's not a 4% slope that's going to have a massive amount of break. And so there's no, now you could overread or underread the amount of break, but you're not questioning which way it's going to go. Where sometimes in the straight ones, you're going to look at those and go, I don't know, is this one going to go left or is it going to go right? Well, what's it going to do? So that was one of the things that really sort of surprised me initially with some of that. There's been so many more. Another one with tour data, which I thought was pretty interesting, and it was the very first thing that I blogged about, and that was looking at players when they get into the lead. Again, this is tour players when they get into the lead, and as a group, they don't do very well when they get the lead. And I'm talking about throughout the course of the tournament. And I'm not just referring to, having the lead at the end of the day and starting round 2 as the clubhouse leader. I'm talking about any time during the course of the round when you found yourself on top of the leaderboard. So I looked at all the data, and all the shots get time stamped in ShotLink. So I can kind of reverse engineer what the leaderboard looks like at any minute, during the course of the round throughout the entire day. And you can kind of see who is where. And it was fascinating to see pressure. And I assume that's what's going on, is people climb in to the lead and, the chase pack, catches them, or oftentimes they're falling back. It's not that the chase pack is catching them. They just start to perform a little bit worse. So that was really fascinating to see. And that it would be a topic that I would love to see, someone do, a graduate thesis paper on and really dive into that one and tackle that. Cause I think it's fascinating on a lot of different fronts.
It's the cameras. The cameras come out. And that cameraman in your back swing will screw anybody up. And I love that with the straight putts. That's really interesting. And man, I would tend to agree as well. There's some comfort in just left edge, right edge, when your target is just the back of the hole. 1, do I believe that? 2, can I somehow get my mind off? That just makes you so holing focused. And that adds pressure, and you're just looking at a golf hole. I don't know. Yeah, it does a thing to my brain that you're probably uncomfortable with, or that I'm uncomfortable with. So, yeah, that strangely makes sense. Now, also in digging into statistics, have you found that any golf sort of truisms? What are the golf truisms that you've found that might be true or might not be, such as, those pieces of advice that we've gotten since we were wee lad golfers or wee lady golfers? There's such a thing. Things that, it's always better to putt than to chip. Has that proven to be statistically useful knowledge?
Yeah, for us amateurs, it's something that I've looked at in Arccos, and I've tweeted about it, and also did a segment on Golf Channel about that last summer. And as you are at a higher handicap, mid-handicap players, when they get off the green, they should typically be putting. Not only are their best shots going to be closer, their worst shots are going to be closer. They're just better all around with the flat stick. Now that, golf is so different, and every course and situation and green complex can be different. And sometimes it's just not possible to put a putter on it, even though you're in the fairway and have sort of a line to the green. It could be 6 feet of elevation change up a massive hill, and that could be really challenging. But typically, a higher handicap is going to want to putt from off the green as much as possible. And lower handicaps, they start to have some options. And I'm talking about scratch players. Once you get down to scratch, they start to have some options where on longer chip and pitch shots, they're going to be about the same, in some cases slightly better with chipping versus putting. And so the general takeaway is, if you are a higher handicap type player, putt as much as you possibly can. If you're a scratch player, err towards putting, but don't be afraid to use your wedges or something else around the green as the shot dictates. And sort of on that topic, one of the other things that was extremely fascinating with the short game was I looked at every skill level. So I looked at scratch players as a group, 5 handicap players, 10s, 15s, 20s. And I looked at how good players were with their short game. And the best, and this part blew my mind, the best short game players for low handicaps, let's just say scratch for now, the best short game players tended to use more clubs around the green. And the worst short game players tended to use just 1 or 2 clubs around the green. So no matter what the shot was, they're grabbing their 60. They're grabbing their 56. Didn't matter what it was. Those were the worst short game players. The best short game players were using anything from 7-iron to 60, depending on what the shot was and what they were trying to do. But the thing that really blew me away was the opposite was true for mid and high handicap players. If you look at 15 handicaps, for example, the 15 handicaps that had the best short game, they used fewer clubs around the green. So they had 1 or 2 shots that they just kind of stuck with. And the worst short game players around the green as a 15 handicap, they were, using 7-iron to lob wedge and everything in between. They were trying to hit way too many shots, which is probably beyond their skill level. So that was, kind of crosses over into one of the things you asked me earlier about what kind of, blew me away and I was really surprised by. That was one thing I was extremely surprised by.
I love that. Yeah. So if you are a lower handicapper, getting more comfortable with hitting all, experimenting with different shots, you probably have the hands, you have the technique to be able to reap the rewards of using a hybrid, using a 7-iron, using different things around the greens. And you should try that. If you're a higher handicapper, get a go-to shot.
Yeah.
Right?
Definitely.
Get your P wedge, and just know that you can, I can get this on the green and get it running. And I'm confident with it. So that's statistics bearing out some.
And if you have a 64-degree wedge in your bag, just melt it down, turn it into something else. Please take it out of your bag. I'm always amazed by I don't want to say a lot, but there's enough people that have that in the bag. And you look at how they perform with that club, and it's pretty atrocious. So please get rid of that club if you have one.
You've heard it here. 64-degree wedges, not getting it done. Get it out of your bag. And on the other end of the other side of the bag, rather, on the longer shots, on the approach shots. So what does statistics bear out? Say I was fortunate enough to have Lou Stagner caddying for me. I'm standing there. We got 240 out. A little water on the right, perhaps. I'm imagining the Honda Classic. And I've got, are we reaching for, say, the 5-wood or the 3-wood, or are we laying up? What are statistics bearing out about going for it or taking the safe shot?
You, as a general rule, and this applies everywhere, whether it's on second shots, whether it's off the tee, you want to advance the ball as far as you possibly can, as often as you can, but making sure to take into account penalty strokes. And so in a situation where there's a lot of trouble at play, we can either shift target extremely far away from trouble, or potentially lay up to remove that trouble completely. And so there's no perfect answer, because every hole, every situation is different. But that's sort of the general rule that you'll want to apply. And there's a course near me that I've played a few times, and a friend of mine plays there quite a bit, and I go out there with him 4 or 5 times a year. And they have a par 5, and there's water on the right, and it's in play basically no matter what you hit off the tee. The water's in play on the right. And there's a steep bank that leads from the edge of the fairway down into the water. So if you miss the fairway on the right, it's going to be wet. The fairway is about 36, 38 yards wide, roughly, depending on how far you hit the ball. For most people, their target, and this is where they would want the ball to finish, would be either at the extreme left edge of that fairway or even into the left rough. And this is not their aim line. This is their target, where we want the ball to finish. So I would tell certain players, like my friend that I play with, who hits it pretty wild off the tee, he gets it out there pretty good, but is pretty wild. I would have him picking a target in the left rough. So, when you're forced with these decisions to lay up, or to potentially remove trouble, or not being able to remove trouble by laying up and having to switch targets, don't be afraid to pick targets into the rough. For amateur players, there's typically not as big of a penalty to be in the rough versus being in the fairway. It's anywhere, it's between a 10th of a shot and a 15th of a shot for amateurs, depending on the distance. And then as you're a mid-handicap player and you're getting farther away from the hole, that difference becomes non-existent typically. So if you're a 15 handicap and you're 250 yards from the hole, typically being in the fairway versus being in the rough makes no difference. You're going to score the same overall. Now, the only caveat there is if you're playing at a club that has 6-inch rough, I mean, that's obviously, very different than a club that has typical normal rough. And so don't be afraid to move targets into the rough to avoid penalty strokes. It's pretty easy to play a shot from 3-inch rough, or it's a lot easier to play a shot from 3-inch rough than it is to have to, drop and reload when you hit one into the water or out of bounds.
Fear not the rough, my friends, but certainly, yes, do fear the water.
Exactly. Yep.
Now, in terms of, I wanted to get into this with you a little bit, golf courses and statistics and data and what that bears out.
Yeah.
About, U.S. Open, golf courses, or trying to pro-proof golf courses, or updating golf courses, or changing golf courses for technology. How does that data influence that discussion in terms of what is a strategic golf course? What is a more challenging golf course? What makes a golf course tougher? Is it the width and angles debate, or should we be stretching out golf courses? Is there anything that the data is telling us that we should keep in mind when it comes to golf course architecture?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's probably a book unto itself. It's probably a series of pods to really get into details on there. So at a high level, some of the things that you talked about, to me, in my opinion, what makes something really interesting is when I have multiple options, but those options are going to be pretty close to the same expected score. And so now I have to decide what I'm going to do there. If you give me 2 options and both of those roads are going to lead to the same overall score, I can pick either one. I just have to make that decision. There's a lot of cases where the obvious option mathematically is obvious, and there really is no other choice. And I can, if I'm working with a player, I can tell them, here's the mathematically optimal route and what you should do. Now that always doesn't align with somebody's comfort level, which is important. So if you're not comfortable over a certain type of shot or picking a certain kind of target, even though that that might be the mathematically optimal target, that is typically going to make your execution of that shot poorer. Your dispersion is going to get bigger, for example. And because your dispersion is getting bigger, that's no longer the mathematically optimal target. And so being comfortable over a shot certainly leads to how you're going to play and what decisions you're going to make. You also touched on angles, and that was one of the early things that I looked at when I started that blog years ago, was angles. And I recently looked at this with amateur players in Arccos. And the tour data, the tour analysis aligned exactly with what I found in Arccos, where for approach shots, the better angle, quote unquote better angle, the one we've all been told since we started playing golf, if the pin's on the right, try to drive it up the left to give yourself the better angle. That doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make an impact. And with amateur golfers, oftentimes the better angle was the worst score. And the worst angle was oftentimes, over 60% of the time, better than the bad angle. Better than the good angle. So being on the wrong side of the fairway, you scored better than being on the correct side of the fairway. But what resulted in the lowest score an overwhelming amount of the time was the middle of the fairway. And so what I think is going on there is, many of us have been told our entire golfing lives, when you have the good angle, you can be more aggressive. And when you have the poor angle, you have to be more conservative. And so what's happening is when you get that good angle, you're firing closer to the flag or right at the flag, and you're short-siding yourself more. And short-siding yourself in golf is a bad thing. It's very challenging to get up and down. And if you're an amateur player like most of us, it's even harder. And so taking flags on directly results in more short-siding, which results in more bogeys, which makes scoring average go up. Being too conservative when you have the poor angle, people are too conservative. And so they're aiming far away from flags that are tucked, and they're leaving themselves a little bit longer of shots, but they're not short-siding it, which makes it easier. And then what I think is happening is the middle of the fairway, people have just sort of, whether that tour players, the same thing I'm describing here with amateurs happened with tour players. When you're in the middle of the fairway, you've sort of backed yourself into naturally a more optimal target. You're not too conservative. You're not too aggressive. You're finding sort of that sweet spot in the middle, and the scoring average from the middle of the fairway was typically better. And so I think the old myth of angles, I don't know that necessarily is true. I don't think it is from all the data that I've looked at. I will say they start to matter a whole lot more as you get closer to the green, where a better angle is just simply a function of how much green you have to work with. And are you short-sided? Are you not short-sided? And that is a huge impact around greens and as you get closer to the hole. So there they start to make a difference. But for us amateurs, that doesn't start to be a thing until we get in well inside of 50, 60 yards, and you start to get greenside. I know there's a lot there. Hopefully that all made sense.
That's fascinating. And it makes sense too, because I can think of how many times we all can where you've found the perfect spot. You found the right angle. You're out there, farther maybe than you usually are, and you found the garden spot, and then you've proceeded to lay the sod over it. Forget about short-siding it, where you've just made a mess of the ideal drive, and I think part of that goes to, as you said, in your mind, it's I have to take advantage of this. Like you put this pressure on yourself to make this is a birdie. I hit a birdie drive, and there's no such thing as hitting a drive that's going to. There's only birdie putts at the end of the day. So you can put pressure on yourself. Maybe being in those ideal spots. So that's really fascinating. You alluded to, working with players. And that has to be one of the cool thing that's happened for you, working with whether it be amateur or pro players. What do they come to you for? And can you share any anecdotes about, without even using names, player X and the way that you've watched them improve, or changes that have happened to them where you've said, darn, this is cool.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. So I've worked with a number of players over the last few years. It's been a blast. And I currently am the assistant coach at Princeton University, helping out with them. So I've been working really closely with those players since last September. And it's been a lot of fun. And I've seen several players adopt a mindset of, I'm going to let the math and the stats help to guide my decision making, not only when I'm on the golf course, but when I am trying to figure out a practice plan and what to work on my game. And I'm not going to just blindly show up at the range and hit some balls and spend some time on the green without a real plan as to what I need to work on and what my weaknesses are. And so I've seen a number of players that have really embraced the stats. And I know you're Broken Tea Society, you're going through this index experiment. And if they embrace the stats in the same way and let it dictate their plan to improve, they're going to improve faster, and they're probably going to improve more. I think so many of us, we tend to like doing things we're good at. And if you are already a really good putter, and I'm a living proof of this, if you're already a good putter, you're probably going to tend to spend more time on your putting when you probably shouldn't. You should just maintenance mode on your putting and just maintain that skill level that you have and dedicate that time elsewhere. I started playing the game in a time where it was drive for show, putt for dough. And I spent a significant amount of time putting for years and years and years. And my ball striking is pretty poor for what my index level has been and is. And that's because I spent far too much time on the putting green. So I've seen players that have gone, from wherever they were, whether it's a really good amateur that was, 500 or 600 in the Wagger World Amateur Golf Ranking, and drop down into the top 10, and help and use stats to help guide decisions both on and off the course. It's pretty powerful when you leverage it and you allow it to drive what you're going to work on and how you're going to work on it.
That's exciting. Since you brought it up, I have to ask now, what is your index, Lou?
I finished last year with a 2.4.
Hey, we're right in the same. We're like neighbors.
So
I think I finished it.
We are
2.2 or 2.4 or something. So we're literally neighbors.
How far do you hit the ball? You said you want to get longer. I'm curious.
That's like asking someone their weight. And on a podcast too.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot, Tom.
Sheesh. It's kind of sad that I probably drive the ball like closer to 250 now when it probably wasn't that long ago. Well, 250, 260. No, give myself some credit. Probably 260, but I was like, length was always kind of growing when I was a younger golfer. Was probably my strength.
Yeah.
I'm 6'3". I'm a big enough arc. Like when I was doing like Paper Tiger, I could hit it pretty far. And then that is not. I've just gotten passed by fitness, age, all those things. So I'm getting back into shape. Feel better, feel stronger. And I'm gonna do some speed stuff because I just want to get to like 275. Like I don't need to be the longest guy on tour, or the longest guy at the club. But
yeah, that's not bad though. I mean, scratch golfers as a group are about 260, 261 okay. Roughly, somewhere in there. So if you're almost 260 as a two, yeah. That's pretty solid. If you could get to 275 or 280, that'd be great. That would, if you got to 280, you would probably overnight get yourself down to scratch or on the plus side pretty quickly. If you got to 280, if you're at 255 now, you would be a really dangerous partner earlier in the season. So go hog wild for the next 2 months, and then I got to find an event to bring you in as my partner because you're gonna score a lot better with 25 extra yards.
Lou, I'm blushing here. I hope that happens. I dream of it. No, that would be great. Hey, where are we going to play? Where do the Tigers play?
Out of Springdale, right there in Princeton. They have a course right on campus. And then we also get to play some rounds over at TPC Jasna Polana. So we play there as well. But Springdale's our home course. It's right there on campus.
Springdale's nice. I did a talk there years ago. Beautiful, beautiful spot. There's so many cool things I want to talk to you about. But before we let you go, one, I want to ask you, how'd your daughter do with selling the 12th hole at Augusta? Because pinned on your Twitter feed is the Lego model that your daughter built of the 12th at Augusta, and you're going to sell it for charity. What happened there?
Yeah, that's you're the first person that's asked about that in all of the podcast appearances I've done. So we had a blast building it. It's enormous. If if you're going to go to my Twitter feed, go there for no other reason other to see my pinned tweet and look at how monstrous this thing is. Took us many months to build. It's really cool. And we did this in the winter of 2019 going into 2020. And we were timing it up to be sort of done, and we were going to talk about it at Augusta. And the Golf Channel was going to do a little story on it for Drive, Chip, and Putt. And then, as you know, 2020, in March of 2020, things kind of changed a bit.
A little bit.
And we had, there was a player that, and I'll leave the player's name out, but there was a player that was going to help us get as many autographs as we could on there of current living champions. And then when COVID happened, everything sort of shut down, and it shut down for a decent period of time. And then we never picked it back up. Very recently, I started talking to another player, and I won't put him on the spot, but he has a foundation. And he is potentially going to assist with trying to get some autographs on there so that we can raffle this off and give all the proceeds to his foundation. Hopefully we can make it work. So it's still sitting in my house.
You still have it.
And my wife is wondering when it's no longer going to be sitting in the house.
It could still be yours, folks. Yeah, check it out on Lou's Twitter feed. It's gorgeous. The 12th at Augusta via Legos. Yeah, that scratches a lot of itches for me. So I would put a bid in on that. Before we let you go, I do have to ask you, though, is there a dark side to golf stats? Is there something where can it be paralyzing to have these numbers bouncing around in your head as you're standing over a golf shot? Can the stats, there might be people listening and saying, well, I just like to golf, and I don't. Stats are going to suck the joy out of golf for me. I want to play better golf, but yeah, I'll just figure it out this way because numbers. I'm not a numbers person. What would you say to them?
Yeah, well, I think the advancement of tools like Arccos that make stat tracking extremely easy. The lift to get this data on your game used to be pretty challenging. Right? The spreadsheet that I would put together years ago. I would expect a very small percentage of the population would be interested in doing that and stick with it enough for it to be meaningful. But now that's completely changed. So now you can get a tremendous amount of very valuable information with minimal effort on your part. And that information can be extremely valuable to help you understand your game and what you need to work on. As far as these stats rattling around in your head when you're playing, that's the last thing it's the last thing that's going through my head when I'm playing. I'm thinking of target. I'm working through my pre-shot routines. I'm doing all the things that I can do to hit the best possible shot. And I don't care who you are. That's not thinking about the stats. So I don't want you to think about these things while you're out there. I want you to use them after you're done to help you guide an understanding of your game and where you should focus your efforts. So, standing over a shot and, going through the every possible stat that could be rattling around in your head, it's not conducive to hitting good golf shots. So I would encourage everyone to not do that, and think of this as something you're going to use afterwards to understand your performance at a higher level, and not on a shot by shot basis. If you hit a really poor shot with a mid iron, you might think you're the worst mid iron player in the world because you hit one poor shot in a ill-timed situation. So, knowing how you actually perform with your mid irons is very valuable. I just don't want you thinking of those things while you're playing. There's lots of other things that are going to lead to better golf, and going through those kind of numbers is not it. Even myself as a math nerd, I'm trying to avoid all of that as much as I possibly can.
Huh. Good to know. So I don't have to have my spreadsheets out there ready to pull them up.
Nope.
On my apps.
Leave them at home. Let Arccos do the heavy lifting, and then use that after you're done to see what's working, what isn't.
Also, the intersection of data and equipment. Oh gosh, we go on that. Just quickly though, I saw you put a Titleist 9-wood in the bag.
I did. Yeah.
Tell me about that move. And obviously you've got the data to back it up to do that. So and it might be a choice where some people are saying, man, I can only have 2 woods in my bag because I'm a player. You're embracing the beauty of your head covers, and where did that come from?
I tried out a 7-wood for the first time last year in a Titleist fitting. And while I was hitting the 7-wood, I tried out 9-wood as well. And didn't pull the trigger on the 9-wood right away, but ended up pulling the trigger. And for me, I absolutely love the flight off of these. I love how they play out of the rough compared to the 9-wood just replaced my 5-iron. I had pretty strong lofted 5-iron. I played T300s, so a little stronger loft. So if you play something like T100s, my 5-iron was like your 4-iron. And it just better out of the rough. I can hit more shots with it. It's easier for me to get it up in the air. And I was never, I don't want to say I was never a fan of those, but I never gave them a fair shot. You're not supposed to. Like, I'm a relatively okay golfer. You're not supposed to have a 9-wood in the bag. You're not supposed to have a 7-wood in the bag. And after I tried these for the first time, I was blown away with how easy they were to hit, how well they set up. I like my 7-wood better than my old hybrid that I had. The old hybrid, I struggled with that one. I hit it left quite a bit, which is a common problem for some people. Hybrids tend to be a little more upright, so they kind of hit them left a little bit more. It was just a huge change for me, and I wish I would have done these years ago. So I think the biggest message I would have for people is, don't ignore clubs that you could potentially put in the bag that are going to make your game better. Forget about what's proper and what you should be playing. Try things out and see what works for you. You may love it, you may hate it, but if it makes your game better, that's what most of us are all trying to do. We're trying to get better and get as low as we can. So 7-wooded and a 9-wood are making me better. So I love having them in the bag, and I wish I would have done it years ago.
There you go. Leave the vanity. Vanity is not going to make putts or get or hit greens for you. But you know what is? 7 and 9 woods, perhaps. Whatever it takes. Lou, can't thank you enough for the time. This has been a lot of fun and very educational and insightful. I will leave you with one question, which is the question that everyone has been hanging on, waiting to get the answer to when they heard that we were having a data stats guru on the podcast, no doubt. Are trees really 90% air?
That's a good question. I want to say somebody actually did a study on this. It wasn't exactly an academic rigor peer-reviewed study, but I don't think that's true. I don't think they're 90% air, and okay. I've hit so many of them that it anecdotally to me that feels pretty accurate.
I would have to agree. I've done the work on that statistic, and I would say it hasn't borne fruit for me. Anyway, Lou, thanks so much for coming on the Golfers Journal podcast. Let's play some golf. We're not too far away. We are a Quaker household here, though. So go Quakers. But otherwise, I'll pull for the Tigers. Meaning, for anyone that's listening, to clarify, my dad went to Penn. My dad went to Penn, and you're and you're coaching at Princeton. So, in any event, thanks so much, and hope to see you out there.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tom, and I look forward to teeing it up with you at some point here soon.